Hello, welcome to another Burgundy with Tweedy video. Today, something a bit special, which is partly why I'm being sort of lazy and just sticking it in my back garden, because I suspect this bottle may need a bit of special treatment and have better stemware here and better equipment in case things go awry. This is the oldest vintage of Domaine Fourrier I currently have in my cellar, and I've been tracking them in a spreadsheet which suggests to me that I really ought to be drinking this sooner rather than later. It's the 2013 vintage. Note the awkward way I'm holding this because it's quite mouldy. The 2013 vintage of Domaine Fourrier's Gevrey Chambertin. It has been in my cellar for some time, and as you can see, a bit of mould around the top there, which doesn't look particularly appealing. That in itself doesn't worry me. Typically, if you get a bit of mould on the outside of the bottle, no problem. Generally, as long as the seal, as long as the cork is all intact, it will be fine on the inside. However, that said, I a while back noted all the recommended drinking windows for these Domaine Fourrier Gevrey Chambertins. I have another 6 after this, different vintages, and the Jancis Robinson approved. I don't know if it's actually Jancis herself who does these drinking windows. Sometimes she outsources some of the tastings and appraisals to other people who work for her, but they're all very, very experienced wine critics. The drinking window for this was something like 2017 to 2024. We're now in July of 2025. So this is beyond the end of what, at some point in history, Jancis Robinson or a member of her staff thought this wine would be able to go to in terms of aging. So it's not a special occasion or anything, and perhaps a hit and miss potentially wine like this is not something you should bring out for a special occasion. It's just a very ordinary weekday evening, and I have ran out of any other wine to drink, so I thought perhaps now is finally the time to try this. I'm going to start by just more for my sense of hygiene than anything else. Let's try and clean off a bit of that mould, as it is a bit unsightly. This is possibly one of those times when the wine prongs are a slightly less appealing option, because I am going to have to plunge through. I mean, like I said, I've given it a wipe here. Perhaps let's do a second wipe. This is terrible content, isn't it? Hopefully that's going to get the worst of it off. But I am now going to be plunging through with the wine prongs. You know, the corkscrewing away, I don't know. Perhaps that pushes less of the external material into the bottle, I don't know. I've never really found a better technique for these wax seals than just to sort of plunge straight through with the wine prongs. Doesn't ever seem perfectly satisfactory somehow. And that's making some slightly untoward scraping sounds as well, which is also not ideal. That is the state of the cork. Just for reference, that looks, well, it is a Diam cork. I can see the Diam mark. I don't know if you can read that number. That is a Diam 10. So it will only have been guaranteed for 10 years. That's cute, isn't it? A little cherub logo there. Well, it will only have been guaranteed for 10 years, and we are slightly over that, aren't we? But I mean, that cork clearly has not disintegrated, has it? It's in pretty good shape. It's only slightly damaged because I've plunged a wine cork through it. There's no bleeding going up there or anything like that. So no real concerns that the wine was not properly sealed, at least. I might even go and get a tea strainer, because I suspect I've dropped little bits of wax in there with all that faff. So this is an example of what I was saying earlier about with wines like this, sometimes it's better to be at home because you have more of an arsenal of tools if needed. Interesting. Right. I don't think any bits. Oh no, there was a big bit of wax came out there, so I'm glad I had that. Well, first thing to remember is Fourier wines are usually quite light on the extraction, so that will have started life as a relatively pale wine. And I think that means the slight sort of browning in the coloration that you get with age is maybe a bit more pronounced. I don't drink a lot of aged Burgundy, decade plus aged Burgundy, so I may well be talking nonsense there, but I do get the sense that you notice that, I don't know if you can see that on camera there, that slight browning, but you know, it's still bright, still slightly translucent. Let's see what it's like on the nose. That seems like an okay start to me. It has a nice, soft, delicate sort of cherry aroma. When I say delicate, I don't mean faint. I don't mean I'm struggling to smell it. It's definitely there. But it has this sort of mellow quality to it, as you might expect with something that has been aging for some time. And I think there are also floral hints there. Hints of violet. More subtle, but yeah, cherry is merging into a kind of floral note. That's quite pretty, actually. Nothing at that stage is suggesting to me that this has gone beyond the pale. Let's give that a little bit of a swirl. You may notice I'm using an unusually large glass. I normally don't see the point of big glasses personally. I use what would typically be called a white wine glass for everything, and I think it works fine, but perhaps this will give it a very subtle edge, I don't know. Not transformed much by swirling. Pretty similar to how it was before. Delicate, gentle cherry and a bit of something floral, probably violet. Nice though. On the palate, that is more savoury and actually slightly spicy, quite spicy, that first sip, than the norm is for Fourier's Gevrey Chambertin. In my experience, I tend to drink them relatively young, I suppose. Not a huge amount of fruit character on the palate there. It's quite vinous, it's winey, and like I say, savoury, little hot touch of pepper, possibly some other spices, but a little bit different from that nose would suggest. The nose is kind of promising gentle, soft fruit and floral notes. Not that floral notes necessarily translate to anything you detect on the palate. That's very much an aroma rather than a taste. Nothing about that says vinegar. It's certainly not gone into a horribly undrinkable state, but the fruit has, I think, tailed off as a result of age. There's usually more fruit present than that in Fourier's Gevrey Chambertin. And some of those other notes, therefore, probably more pronounced. Maybe there was always a hint of spice to this. I'm slightly reminded of Mercury. That's the village-style Mercury, spicy cherry, isn't it? The cherry here is more on the nose than on the palate, but something a little bit like that. Coming back to the nose now, definitely getting some mushroom, and that usually is related and can veer into Sous-Bois, forest floor. I would say here more mushroomy, I think. Another thing that can develop with age. There's still a reasonable amount of acidity there. Definitely not vinegary, but even though the fruit character has gone into hiding a bit, still sort of bright in the acidity. The mouthfeel is, I don't know, initially sort of silky, but then it kind of splutters out towards the end. And I noticed the spice, and there probably is a little bit of tannin there actually as well, which is surprising for Fourier. It's usually pretty low on tannin. I should probably come to some sort of summary then. Well, I think we know by now that I tend to prefer relatively young Burgundies, basically. I like fruit expression and lots of fruit. That is something you generally sacrifice with age. And I think that is what's happened here, that the fruit character, at least on the palate, has started to disappear. Perhaps earlier in the progression of this wine aging, that was replaced with more interesting tertiary characters. Now, I don't know, it's savoury and it's mushroomy, and some of that spice, as I say, may be pronounced by aging, but this is partly just my bias of not really being that into aged Burgundy. But I don't know that what is replacing the fruit is worth that trade-off for me. Maybe this needs a lot more airing. Perhaps I might even consider decanting that. I know that's not normal for Burgundy, but yeah, perhaps it needs a lot more airing, and I may come back to you later with an update on what I think about it. But initial impressions are, I can sort of see what Jancis Robinson and team were saying by the drinking window going up to 2024. I think that's what's happening there, is that it's got to a point where the fruit has just sort of disappeared. For me, that's not a style I really enjoy. I don't mind if the fruit becomes more subtle or mellow or something. And that's sort of the case on the nose, but on the palate, not getting much fruit at all. But I will come back to you later if I have any further thoughts. I have decanted this, put it in a carafe. It's been there for well over an hour. I've had a sip or two of this since decanting it, and yeah, it has improved, but still don't think this is exactly amazing. The fruit on the nose has gone a little bit more liqueur-y, liqueur cherries. Now and again, I think I get a bit of a flash of blackberry as well. Mûr. Actually, quite a lot. Yeah, blackberry, yeah. Blackberry and cherries. Blackberry and maybe black cherries. That is still quite a pretty nose. I'm noticing the floral notes less now than I was initially. There's probably a hint of something over and above that bit of fruit, but yeah, again, I'm getting that mushroom. Yeah, it's not a bad nose. I never particularly want mushroom in a wine, to be honest. What is them? I don't know. I don't quite see the benefit of that. I like mushrooms, don't get me wrong. It's just, I like cheddar cheese as well, but I don't necessarily want a wine to smell of that. I think it would be unfair to say that there is no fruit on the palate. There is definitely something fruity. It's just, I suppose, after a dozen years, it's not so fresh and it's not so identifiable as it would have been at a younger age. Again, hints of that blackberry and black cherry, maybe. The taste of it is sort of drier, as in the dried version of those fruits. And I don't think you ever get dried blackberries. I don't think I've ever seen those. But if you can imagine freeze drying a blackberry, and on the palate there's more earthiness, possibly sense of those sort of mushroomy sous-bois sort of flavours as well as aromas. And I guess it does overall have a sort of seriousness to it. There is nothing about this which is just boozy fruit juice. But I can't help but, perhaps, maybe this is just not meant for the likes of me. That's it. We've established, as I said, I like young, fruity Burgundy. And this is clearly no longer young and therefore not particularly fruity. It's the sort of serious wine that is probably intended in this state to be had with food and probably some fairly serious gourmet French food. I'm a vegetarian, so foie gras is an unknown territory to me, but I imagine this is the sort of thing one would have with a foie gras and truffle pate and all that kind of stuff. I like truffles, but it does have that, vinous quality, very winey, but also quite savoury. There is definitely some fruit there, but it's in something other than a very young and fresh state. I feel like I'm meandering here and not really coming to a conclusion. Definitely better for decanting / airing. Certainly not unenjoyable, but for my personal taste in Burgundy, I feel as though I could find something younger and much cheaper that would probably be more to my taste. And I have really enjoyed these Fourrier wines before, but just generally to me in a slightly younger state. So I withdraw my earlier hypothesis that this is indeed beyond its drinking window. It's in an advanced state of age. I certainly don't think anything about this is spoilt or undrinkable. Whether it's in an optimum state, I don't know. perhaps not. Make of all of that what you will. Sorry, just a lot of rambling, really. It was a difficult thing to put my finger on. I think I will stick to these Fourrier Gevrey Chambertins when they're a bit younger, personally. But that has been an interesting experiment. Cheers.